First of all, I want to thank Kins, Rabbi Bressler in particular here, because the truth is he's the one who has really gotten everything set. So I really want to thank him very much. And of course, Kins, for the opportunity all these years. This is, I think, my 31st year of giving this year. So the Jews wandered in the desert for 40. So we'll see what happens with that. Um, this is a bit of, obviously, it's a different venue right now, different than our normal Shabbat morning 8:30 Sheurim. But I'm hoping that I have to talk with Rabbi Matanki whether we'll continue this on an ongoing basis or not. That we'll see, uh, especially when the COVID restrictions are removed. So perhaps we'll be able to go back to Shabbat morning, or maybe we'll stay with this format. That's number one. I want to thank all of you who are coming tonight. And I also want to dedicate this year for Refuah Shalem for a person by the name of couple Dov Ben Shalamet Tova, who has been hospitalized with COVID and other complications over the past 3 or 4 weeks. So hopefully he is soon to be on the mend. All right, let's now begin with Parshat Bereishit. We're able to begin our new series with this Parsha itself. Tonight, I'd like to dwell with you on the issue and explore with you the issue of what is the nature of man? What really makes us human beings? What makes us special? Now, in the first place, we're going to go to a pasuk, which is one which is well known. We won't be able to delve into this, the understanding of this pasuk in all of its ramifications, because Gemaras talk about this at length. But I'm going to focus only on what is our nature, not what was a man originally, what were human beings, the factors of men and women. Were they then? In other words, did Adam have both elements? Do we have those now? A number of great people, whether it's the Rav or in Midrashim, they all deal with it. However, I will like to read this first. First, I'd like to set the stage for the discussion this evening with the pasuk Perak Aleph pasuk Chav Zayin. It'll usually be good if you have a chumash with you, so that you can look tonight. You won't, in general, if you don't have a chumash, you can also follow, but it ideally will assist us. The sixth day comes. HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates yesh me'ayin, ex nihilo. He creates the world from nothing, whatever that means. And the account in Bereishit gives us a couple of opportunities to understand man's place in the universe. We're going to explore that this evening. But let's first look at the pasuk, Perak Aleph pasuk Kav Zayin, chapter 1:27. Vayivra Elokim et ha'adam b'tzalmo. Elokim, which is God the creator, God the judge, is used here. Elokim, God created et ha'adam b'tzalmo, in his image. Now, of course, right there we have an issue of what does it mean to say that we're created in God's image. B'tzelem Elokim bara oto. In the image of God, God created man. Zachar ukeva, man and woman, whether it was one entity at the beginning, or just in its simple sense, God created both men and women. Bara otam, created them, all of them, men, women, all human beings. That's important to stress. In an age of contention in which we live, it's important to stress that God is the source or the pedigree of all human beings, and not just Jews, but everyone. And so this is the pasuk itself. I want to just talk a little bit to you about the idea of tselem. What is a tselem? If you look at the word tselem, Of course, in modern Hebrew, we have matzlema, and we have, of course, other usages that include the word tselem in it. But the many times linguists will say that in Hebrew, the first two letters provide us with a concept, and then the third letter gives the concept its direction. Now, the first two letters are tseil, tzadi lamed, and I think that these two letters and the word tseil is very instructive for us because um, what is a tseil? A tseil is a shadow. Now, this shadow, uh, we need to think about what does it function. You know, you're walking down the street in the summer, and you walk past something. It could be a building, could be a tree, or it could be someone behind you who may be passing you. Nowadays, a lot of people pass me in terms of speed as to how I walk, but very often, depending on where the relationship we are with the sun, whether it's morning and how we're walking, or toward evening, the shadow of the person seems to oftentimes can precede me. And at that point, I know that there's a person who's there. That is its sale. That's a shadow. The shadow is indicative of either an object or a being, or in this case, a human being that is in the area. So I would submit to you that one of the things that we can take with us this evening concerning the nature of man, among other things, is that man is in its sale of God. Man possesses the shadow of God. He certainly doesn't, or we, when I say he, obviously it means we, men and women, we certainly don't look like God looks. But when I look at another human being, I'm seeing that Tselem Elokim, I know that God is in the room. That is perhaps one of the great takeaways that we can have from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's usage of the word Tselem Elokim, is that every human bears an imprint, which is such that when I look at another human being, and I certainly need to be able to look at another human being, I know that God is in the room. Not because I see God, but that human being reminds me that God is there. And I've mentioned in the past a number of times that the Gemara tells us that that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the great, perhaps the great transformational leader of the Jewish people in the first century CE, 1900 years ago, the Gemara talks about his greatness. He lived 120 years. It might be that the Gemara is just telling us that that he lived the fullest of lives in every way, whether it was in business because he was in business, or whether he was a student and he was a student of Hillel, or whether it was when he was the Gadol Ador, when he was the Nasi, he was actually a Nasi of the Sanhedrin. In each case, he fulfilled his obligations to the letter. So he certainly was an Adam Shalem. The Gemara tells us about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that no one ever preceded saying to him Shalom. Whenever he was, and the Gemara says, Afilu Nochri Shebashuk. That means to say that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai greeted every single human being, Jew, non-Jew, people that he knew, people that he didn't know, simple folk, and perhaps great intellectual folk. No one ever said to him first, good morning, Rabbi Yochanan. He always beat him, so to speak, to the punch. I would submit to you that that's not a statement of his personality. That's a statement of his theology. Because he truly understood when he saw another human being who was passing him by, that he was reminded of the image of God. And as actually Abraham Joshua Heschel said, how can, once you know that God is every man's pedigree, how can you ever demean another human being? How can you ever reduce them in your eyes or in their own eyes? And so this Tselem Elokim concept is something that we need to take with us, so that sometimes, let's face it, we're all Tselem Elokim, but we all tend to make mistakes, and sometimes we can get on each other's nerves, and certainly that can happen in times like this, these unusual, bizarre times we have to remember that we are interacting with its Tselem Elokim. The Torah goes out of its way to tell us that. Okay, that's the first element that I would talk about here. Now, secondly, I'm going to ask you, if you have a Tanakh, you can turn to Sefer Tehillim. You turn to Sefer Tehillim, Perek Chet. One of the most beautiful prakim. They're all beautiful, but certainly one of the most, for me, I find it inspiring. All people find different things that are inspiring, but this Perek Chet, is in itself so telling about David HaMelech's view of the world and his view of human beings. So he begins by saying, I can picture him getting up in the middle of the night, as the Gemara tells us, and writing these lines, woken up by the punctual wind, which at midnight blew through his window and was like an alarm clock to him. Just one thing before we get into it directly, in Pasuk Gimel, in Perek Chet 8 of Tehillim, it says, "Mipi olalim v'yonakim yisadata oz." In the mouths of babes, we have this term from the mouths of babes. It's taken directly from Perek Chet of Tehillim. From those, olalim are little older children. They're 2 or 3 years old, toddlers. The yonkim, those are children who are still nursing, very, very young. Yisadata oz. David HaMelech says, you have established strength, whether it's their strength or God's strength. When you look at a child, when you look at a little child who himself at this point does not have that much self-awareness, some, of course, but they have no idea of their potential or what they want to be, right? They get through each day with hopefully having their needs satisfied. So David says, but if you look at these children, you can see God in the process. Once again, we don't see God, we see the Tzela Elokim. We see the image of God. Now, in the middle of the night, I can just picture this in Yerushalayim with those thousands of stars. Pasuk Hey says, we say Pasuk Dalet, Ki er'eh shamecha, when I see your heavens, ma'aseh etzba'otecha, the works of your fingers, not even of your hands, of your fingers. Yareach v'kochavim, the moon and the stars, asher konanta, that you have established. Okay? Then he asks 2 questions, or actually one question which has 2 parts. Ma enosh ki tizkuru. What is man? That's our theme for the evening. Ma enosh, what is man ki tizkurenu, that you should remember him, that he should occupy any of your thoughts. Uven adam, and of course when the term ben adam is used, of course it speaks of both our mortality and to some degree our potential greatness. He tifkedenu, again a form of remembering. Now he answers. When you I won't give you the answer yet. He says those are his questions. Now the Malbim, who was one of the great 19th century Rabbanim and thinkers of our people, Ashkenazic, he said that David HaMelech's question is more than just, gee, who am I? What am I? Like, in other words, you should bestow such wonder around me, that I should be zocheh, that I should be able to be privileged to be able to be a part of this. The Malbim says that certainly is a question, but it's deeper than that. The Malbim lived around the time of Darwin in the 19th century. I believe he probably was influenced and one thing I think certainly he had to do, he had to contend with the issue of what Darwin was saying ultimately. What is man? That was Darwin's question. What is man? So the Malbim offers a remarkable statement, or shall we say, a remarkable interpretation of David HaMelech's question, what is man? And the Malbim says you need to look as to how species are categorized. Species. He said, now when you go to categorize a species, he says that there are two elements to each one. And he's going to give an example in a second. But he says one is that which is essential to that being. In other words, what makes it, what gives it its definable being? What is it? The second element is what are the incidental elements of this being? So one is the essential elements, and what are the incidental? Let's just give an example. For a human being, the eyes are an incident. The color of the eyes are incidental. Maybe the hair or lack thereof, or the hair color. Those things are incidental. A person, even if he had no hair at all, or had no arm, maybe he lost an arm, or she lost an arm, God forbid they lose an arm, they're still a human being, But what makes a human being, says the Malbim, is that he has a nefesh and seichel. Is that a human being has, by definition, a nefesh chaya. As a matter of fact, that's what the Torah says. We have a nefesh, even though the same term is used with animals, but we're going to focus with this now. There is a distinction, but we're going to just say that he says two things: nefesh, which is a soul, something which transcends the time in which he physically lives on this earth, and seichel. Seichel does not mean that necessarily that he has a high IQ. It means that he's capable, that human beings are capable of abstract thinking, that they are capable of memory, conscious memory, not like a gerbil in an experiment, but conscious memory, and they do something that as far as we know, no other animals can do. That is, they are capable of visualizing vision, and I've mentioned this in earlier shurim as well. We're capable of visualizing things that are not here now and determining how they should be. Every architect does that physically. All right. Great thinkers of all time have been able to say, here is what existence is now, here's how it should be. And then they can actually visualize it as if it were here, I remember I was in Eretz Yisrael one time, and we had the pleasure of meeting Lova Eliyav, who was he was a member of the Knesset, not necessarily an observant person, but completely dedicated to the cause of Israel and Zionism, the Jewish people. And he took us on a tour in a dune buggy of we were right near Gaza at the time. At that time, this was 40 years ago. So there was or at least 35 years ago, there was no there was no trouble that we would worry about. Matter of fact, we could see the flags of Israel and Egypt flying at that point. And he as he was going, he points out and he says, "Kan Panimiyah." He's talking about a school that we built and a yeshuv. He said, "Kan Panimiyah." I'm looking. There's no dormitory there. And he says, "Kan Beit Sefer." I'm looking. There's no Beit Sefer. There's no building there. All I see is sand dunes. So what I saw as sand dunes, he already saw. He saw dormitories, and he saw laboratories, and he saw schools. That is vision. Only human beings can have that. And sadly, not every human being uses it to its fullest. So this is what the Malbim says. And he says, what is essential to man is his nefesh and his seichel. And he says, as opposed to, and you're ready for this, this is what leads me to believe he was influenced to write by Darwin. He said, Take, for example, the volfish. He calls it a tanin, but then in parentheses, a volfish, which is a whale. He says, now what is the definition of a whale? Is a whale is it a fish that gives live birth? Now, its definition is it's a fish that gives live birth and nourishes its young, or is it a mammal? After all, it gives live birth and it nurses its young. They get their nourishment from the mother whale, and of course they're very attached to it as well. So what shall it be? Is it a fish or is it a mammal? So he comes to the conclusion that in fact that the fact that it gives live birth and nurses its young, that's just a statement about an incidental that it does. Its essence is that it lives in the water. That's its home. Its entire life is in the water. It can be nothing. If it never gave birth, it could still be a whale, and if it never gave birth. But if it doesn't live in the water and it doesn't swim, then it wouldn't be a whale. He says that's what man is. You have to understand, man is not just. Then he comes to the question, is man nothing more than a more sophisticated animal? Are we essentially animals? Are we chai, essentially animals? And our intellect is much greater than almost all the other animals in the world. Now, greater than all the animals, and of course, far superior to 99% of them. There are certain animals that have a higher intellect, we would say. And is that man? Or, in other words, is man shall we say, a medaber chai? Is he is he a chai medaber? Is he an animal that happens to speak? And speech, when the Chazal use the term speech, they mean abstract thinking. As we said, to be able to plan, to be able to see things as they should be, not necessarily only as they are, and to recall how they were. So he comes to the conclusion, no. The fact that we have hands to be able to live on this earth, that's incidental. What is the nature of man, says the Malbim? The nature of man is that he is a medaber chai. He is a speaking, he is a medaber. His essence is, he is of the Elyonim. He uses the term Elyonim. We are a medaber chai. We are a speaking, abstract thinking creation of God that also lives on this planet. So that's what the Malbim says. Now, Rabbi Moshe bar Soloveitchik wrote a very powerful essay called "On the Nature of Man," and he discusses that there are two recordings of the creation of man in Sefer Bereishit. One puts man at the periphery of the world, that Hashem created everything in the world. He created us on the sixth day. And so then we were dead last, so to speak. Now, again, last sometimes is, acharon chaviv, then we can say that. But nevertheless, man was put into a universe and that existed. And he calls that objective man. Man is like fish. Doesn't mean we're only fish, but man is like fish. Man is like a zebra. Man is like a lion. Man is a part of the ecological structure of our world. That is one element of man. Then Rabbi Yoshe says there's a second one, a second description of the creation of man, and that puts human beings at the center of the universe. And Rabbi Yoshe says that we need to understand that these are both of these elements, human beings at the center of the universe and human beings at the periphery, are really two aspects of the same creation. And so he says that and I'm going to just quote briefly what he says here concerning man. He says, man object, meaning to say the man that is first described is just a part of the universe itself. Man object does not exercise too much metaphysical. In other words, he doesn't think beyond today. and this world, ethical freedom. His actions follow the collective pattern of society. We're followers in our man object, the system in which he lives. We live in the system, so we have to function. We have to do well. He is fair. Now listen to what Rabbi Yoshe says. He is fair, but not kind. Honest, but not compassionate. Just, but not loving. He is unemotional, precise, and ignorant of the world of individual conception. That is one element to our being. And it's a necessary element to our being. That in fact, we function within the world. But it has drawbacks. It has limitations. Then Rabbi Yoshe goes on and says, on the other hand, man subject is elusive and clandestine. He is not uniform because his depth allows him to hide. And he quotes the fact that Adam hid from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, animals don't, well, they do hide, all right, but he consciously hid. Unlike man object, man subject is not always fair because he displays extremism. Listen to these words that really apply even to this day. His awareness is spiritual as opposed to sensual. And he is inexact and impatient with details. Oh boy, that describes some of this. But he is sensitive to the grandeur of the whole. He is visionary and willful, right? And his logic is voluntaristic rather than rational. So Rabbi Yoshe, he goes on the entire essay, which by the way can be found in a number of places, but it can be found in one of the volumes that have come out on the Rav called Shiurei Rav. And you can take a look at that and get it. You can get it online. I'm going to conclude now because we have about a half hour. I don't want to overextend my welcome. There are actually two pieces that I want to bring about here, and I should be able to conclude within 5 minutes, I hope. The first one is taken from one of the writings of the Maral Prague. He lived from 1520 to 1609. Hashem gave him a long life, which he used productively. And of course, mostly when you talk about the Maral, you talk about the Golem. But frankly, that's not our issue here at all. But he was an educator. He was a philosopher. He certainly was a tremendous Baal Machshava. And he wrote volumes and volumes on so many different topics. So I'm going to read what we have here in English, but those who wish may look in the Moral's Sefer called Tiferet Yisrael, Paragimel, the very opening lines. He says, we find the distinction between man and all other sublime and earthly beings. In other words, man occupies a middle rung, according to him, in Hashem Yisborach's creations. There are, first of all, the sublime beings. They exist in their most perfect state. So when you talk about an angel, the angel doesn't grow. They need do no act to fulfill their potential. They don't have to do that. They are what they are. God created them, like you would buy some article in the store. That's the way it is. It doesn't have potential. It does what it does. Similarly, says the Maral, earthly beings, with the exception of man, do not act to fulfill their potential because there is no change in their basic makeup nor action that would bring them to their potential. Oh, yes, of course, dogs start as puppies and they move to dogs, become mature dogs. Yes, that's true. But in the end, a lion is a lion. There are no good lions. There are no bad lions. There are lions. And lions do things predictably. All right? There are no good zebras and no bad zebras, just zebras. And similarly, lions eat zebras. So that's maybe good news for the lions, bad news for the zebras, but that's the way it is. And so therefore, the Maral says, human beings, only human beings, he says, there is only human beings have the concept of potential, that human beings can go from what they are to what they can be, to what they ought to be. Only human beings have the concept of ought. there is no ought for a lion. There is no ought for a parakeet. There is an ought for a human being. An ought means behavior that is considered and then acted upon. That's how I ought to be. Here's the type of father I am. Here's the type of son that I am. Here's the type of brother, the type of teacher, the type of rabbi, the type of plumber that I am. Here is the type of each of those categories that I ought to be. Man is capable to contemplate, or he is, as we said, a medaber chai, but he is a medaber, first and foremost. I'll now conclude with a comment from the Ketav Kabbalah, Rav Yaakov Mecklenburg, who lived also in the 19th century. What makes an act a human act? What makes an act a human act as opposed to an animalistic act? So there are three elements to it. One, and you can remember them through the acronym. I've created sort of an acronym for you. Davar, Daled, Bet, Resh. Dalet stands for dot. Human beings were created to have a nefesh within them, all right? The Torah informs us through the description, quote, nefesh chaya, man's inherent advantage over all other sublime and earthly creations. He also puts us in the middle, so to speak. It is free will that he consciously and willfully chooses a path of good, or the opposite. The word nefesh connotes freedom of choice and will, because when we use the word nefesh in Tanakh, it's not always just the soul. Matter of fact, more often than not, it just means will, a willfulness to do something. So he actually combines here. We're not going to go into it this evening, but the Ketav Kabbalah, Reb Mecklenburg, makes the following statement that in essence, for a human being to make a human act, we need three elements. Knowledge. He has to know that the act is either good or bad. Must have choice, two choices. Bechira. And so that's the bet. Dalet, bet. And finally, he must have ratzon, davar. He must will the consequence in order to either receive reward or, God forbid, the opposite, to be punished. So as human beings, just to summarize, as human beings, of course, we need to remember that human beings are capable of contemplation. They can see things as they are and things as they should be. And that includes each and every one of us. We talked a moment about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who understood that every human being is b'tselem Elokim. Every human being doesn't look like God. But when we see another human being, that we know that God is in fact here. He's in the room with me. And by doing that, that halavai, we would do that all the time. There would be no demeaning of another human being, not a white person, not a black person, not Christians, not Muslims, no one, because God created all of us. Finally, we have the idea of tseil, that hopefully we can take that with us. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's understanding and theological actions were based on the fact that he did see every human being as a creation of God. And when we look at each human being, ideally we should be able to look at them and say that God is in the room. So thank you very much for joining this evening. And I want to thank again Rabbi Bressler, and I want to thank Kins. And Amir Hashem, we should meet next week, Wednesday, Parshat Noach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Myers. Have a great night, everyone.